August 17th, 1942. Rouen-Sotteville Rail Yards, France. Hauptmann Hans-Joachim Jabs gripped his FW-190's control column, watching 12 B-17 Flying Fortresses maintain formation at 23,000 feet. 7 years flying fighters for the Luftwaffe, 26 confirmed kills against RAF bombers, and Jabs had never seen anything like this. The Americans flew in perfect defensive boxes, each bomber bristling with 13.50 caliber machine guns. His wingman, Unteroffizier Klaus Fischer, radioed, "Herr Hauptmann, they're not breaking formation. The British broke formation. The British scattered." These Americans held position like they were flying parade maneuvers, not facing Germany's elite fighter squadrons. What Hauptmann Jabs didn't know, what no Luftwaffe pilot would understand until the Reich lay in ruins, was that those 12 B-17s represented the vanguard of an industrial avalanche that would drop 640,000 tons of bombs on Fortress Europe. The Luftwaffe High Command had calculated they could destroy the American bomber offensive within 6 months. They would get 3 years of escalating devastation instead. Luftwaffe intelligence designated the B-17 mission as Case Study Alpha 17 within 48 hours of the Rouen raid. Oberst Josef Beppo Schmid, commanding Luftwaffe Intelligence West, assigned his most experienced analysts to evaluate this new threat. Their September 1942 assessment, preserved in Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv Freiburg, file RL 23/1178, concluded, American heavy bomber doctrine emphasizes daylight, precision bombing in formation. Defensive armament heavy, but formations vulnerable to coordinated fighter attack. Assess threat as manageable. Estimated timeline to operational suppression, 4 to 6 months maximum. The confidence was understandable. German fighters had devastated British daylight bomber operations in 1939 to 1940, forcing the RAF to abandon daytime raids entirely. Luftwaffe doctrine assumed any daylight bomber offensive would follow the same pattern. Initial operations, mounting losses, tactical withdrawal to night bombing, eventual abandonment of strategic bombing altogether. Major Gunther Roll, commander of JG-11 Fighter Wing, wrote in his October 1942 tactical assessment, "The Americans will learn what the British learned. Daylight bombing against determined fighter opposition is suicide." By December 1942, Luftwaffe intelligence had analyzed 15 American bombing missions. Their revised assessment noted concerning defensive discipline but maintained confidence. The analysis documented, enemy formations maintain cohesion under attack, individual bomber losses acceptable, but formation integrity prevents catastrophic losses. However, winter weather will reduce operations. Spring offensive can be countered with concentrated fighter response. General Adolf Galland, commanding Luftwaffe Fighter Arm, allocated resources accordingly. He projected needing 800 fighters concentrated in the West to destroy American bomber capacity by summer 1943. What Luftwaffe intelligence couldn't comprehend was that the B-17 represented a fundamental reimagining of strategic bombing doctrine. The aircraft's development began not with military requirements, but with Boeing's desperation to survive the Depression. On August 8, 1934, Boeing engineers led by Edward Curtis Wells gathered at Plant 2 in Seattle, Washington, to discuss Army Air Corps procurement for a multi-engine bomber. Claire Egvet, Boeing president, made the decision that would change warfare. We're building a 4-engine heavy bomber, not a twin-engine medium. If we lose, we go bankrupt. If we win, we change aviation history. The Army Air Corps specification called for a bomber that could reach 200 miles per hour and carry 2,000 pounds of bombs. Boeing Model 299, the B-17 prototype, exceeded every requirement when it first flew on July 28, 1935. Top speed, 236 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 24,600 feet. Bomb load, 4,800 pounds. Range, 2,000 miles. But the revolutionary aspect wasn't performance, it was defensive philosophy. Wells integrated defensive armament into the fundamental design. 5.30 caliber machine gun positions, later upgraded to 13.50 caliber positions. The bomber could defend itself without fighter escort, or so the theory went. The name Flying Fortress came from Seattle Times reporter Richard Williams, who watched the prototype bristling with gun positions and declared, "Why, it's a flying fortress." Boeing immediately trademarked the name. The Army Air Corps bought it because it validated their doctrine. Precision daylight bombing could win wars without fighter escort. Development proceeded through multiple variants. The B-17E, entering service in November 1941, incorporated combat lessons from RAF operations. The tailgun position, added after British reports showed rear attacks were most effective, transformed defensive capability. The B-17F, operational by May 1942, increased bomb load to 8,000 pounds and added chin turrets to counter head-on attacks. Each modification addressed specific tactical vulnerabilities while maintaining the core concept. Heavily armed bombers in mutually supporting formations could fight through to targets in daylight. The Luftwaffe understood aircraft production. German factories produced 15,596 fighters in 1942. What they couldn't conceive was American production at scales that violated everything they understood about industrial capacity. Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle produced 6,981 B-17s during the war. Douglas Aircraft Company's Long Beach facility produced 2,995 B-17s. Lockheed Vega's Burbank plant produced 2,750 B-17s. Total B-17 production, 12,731 aircraft between 1939 and 1945. Peak monthly production reached 362 B-17s in March 1944, more four-engine bombers in a single month than Germany produced all year. The production system involved 8 primary contractors, 1,500 subcontractors across 38 states, and employed 110,000 workers at peak. Each B-17G contained 40,878 rivets. Wright Aeronautical Corporation produced 18,500 R-1820 Cyclone engines, specifically for B-17s, at their Paterson, New Jersey facility. Sperry Gyroscope Company delivered 12,731 ball turrets from their Long Island plant. The program cost $3.1 billion in 1940s dollars. Boeing's Seattle facility demonstrated industrial efficiency German planners deemed impossible. A B-17F required 21,000 man-hours to produce in early 1942. By mid-1943, the same aircraft required 8,500 man-hours. By early 1945, production time dropped to 4,200 man-hours. Boeing wasn't just building bombers. They were perfecting assembly line techniques that reduced production time by 80% while increasing output quality. The workforce composition would have shocked Nazi racial theorists. Women comprised 47% of Boeing's Seattle workforce by 1944. African Americans made up 9% of the workforce. These inferior races in Nazi ideology were outproducing the German master race by factors of 10 in categories of heavy bombers. The 900th B-17 off the Seattle production line carried a plaque. Built by the men and women of Boeing, German propaganda called American production figures lies. They weren't lies. They were industrial mathematics applied at scales authoritarian systems couldn't match. The 97th Bombardment Group flew that first combat mission on August 17, 1942. 12 B-17Es took off from Polebrook, England, led by Major Paul Tibbets. The target, Rouen-Sotteville rail yards. All 12 bombers returned. Luftwaffe fighters attacked, but the formation's defensive fire damaged 3 FW-190s without suffering losses. General Ira Eaker, commanding 8th Air Force bombers, sent a cable to Washington. Mission successful. Concept validated. The validation proved premature. As operations intensified, Luftwaffe fighters developed tactics specifically targeting B-17 formations. Major Egon Mayer of JG-2 Fighter Wing pioneered the head-on attack, exploiting the early B-17's weakest defensive arc. On November 23, 1942, JG-2 shot down 4 B-17s from the 303rd Bombardment Group using frontal attacks near Saint-Nazaire. Mayer's report documented: approach at bomber altitude, dive 500 meters for speed, pull up into head-on pass firing continuously, break away before collision. Single pass yields 60 to 70% hit rate on lead bomber. The Americans adapted. By February 1943, all B-17Fs incorporated chin turrets with twin .50 caliber machine guns specifically to counter head-on attacks. The 91st Bombardment Group at Bassingbourn developed the combat box formation, 21 bombers arranged in staggered altitude layers, creating overlapping fields of fire. Each bomber could support two others. A fighter attacking any bomber faced defensive fire from 3 to 5 aircraft simultaneously. The doctrine evolved through blood. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission on August 17, 1943, exactly 1 year after the first raid, demonstrated the bomber offensive's terrible mathematics. The 1st Bombardment Wing dispatched 230 B-17s to Schweinfurt's ball-bearing factories. The 4th Bombardment Wing sent 146 B-17s to Regensburg's Messerschmitt factories. German fighters attacked in waves. The Americans lost 60 B-17s. Another 168 suffered battle damage. 600 American aircrew killed or captured in a single day. Yet the bombers returned. On October 14, 1943, the 8th Air Force sent 291 B-17s back to Schweinfurt. Luftwaffe fighters destroyed 77 bombers. The Americans called it Black Thursday. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding Army Air Forces, faced calls to abandon daylight bombing entirely. He refused. Production would replace losses. Tactics would improve. Long-range escort fighters would arrive. The offensive would continue. The 379th Bombardment Group at Kimbolton exemplified this brutal calculus. Between May 1943 and April 1945, the group flew 330 combat missions, dropped 26,460 tons of bombs, and lost 141 B-17s in combat, a 42% total loss rate. The group received the Distinguished Unit Citation twice. Replacement bombers kept arriving. Replacement crews kept training. The missions never stopped. The Luftwaffe's tactical evolution revealed not adaptation but escalating desperation documented in their own combat reports. In January 1943, Oberst Hannes Trautloff, commanding JG-54, submitted a tactical assessment to Luftwaffe High Command preserved in Bundesarchiv File RL 8/85. American bomber formations demonstrate unprecedented defensive discipline. Standard fighter attacks from beam and rear quarters yield diminishing returns. Success rate: 2.8 bombers destroyed per 100 fighter sorties. Assessment: acceptable attrition ratio. By January 1944, Trautloff's successor filed a starkly different report. Bomber formations now accompanied by long-range escort fighters. Our pilots faced defensive fire from bombers plus offensive fire from escorts. Success rate: 0.9 bombers destroyed per 100 sorties. Assessment: unsustainable. The numbers told a story of systematic failure. Major Heinz Baer of JG-1, who survived 1,000 combat missions with 220 confirmed victories, recorded in his diary entries from March 1944. We intercept formation of 400 B-17s. My group shoots down 4. 16 of my pilots do not return. This is not air combat. This is industrial slaughter. The mathematics that Luftwaffe fighter pilots confronted daily grew more brutal with each passing month. A B-17 formation of 500 bombers meant 6,500 defensive machine guns. Add 200 P-51 escort fighters with their 6 machine guns each, and attacking pilots faced 7,700 guns, generating walls of .50 caliber fire. German fighter production increased to compensate, but production couldn't solve tactical impossibility. In February 1944 alone, Big Week, the Luftwaffe lost 355 fighters, destroyed, and 2,144 pilots killed or wounded defending against American bomber raids. That single week's pilot casualties exceeded the entire graduating class of fighter pilot schools for the month. Major Gunther Roll, who ended the war with 275 victories, reflected in a 1989 interview, "We killed them by the hundreds. The bombers kept coming by the thousands." Every pilot knew the mathematics were impossible. We fought anyway because we were soldiers, but we knew. The desperation manifested in increasingly radical tactics that violated every principle of fighter combat. On March 18, 1944, elements of JG-11 attempted ramming attacks against B-17 formations over Friedrichshafen. Oberst Hermann Graf's order, preserved in unit records, stated, "If ammunition is exhausted, ram the bomber. Your sacrifice may save German lives on the ground." 7 German fighters successfully rammed B-17s that day. 6 German pilots died. The Americans lost 7 bombers from a formation of 218, a loss rate of 3.2%. Replacement B-17s arrived from the States within 10 days. The Rumjäger ramming fighters represented the Luftwaffe's acknowledgement that conventional tactics had failed. In April 1944, General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland authorized Sonderkommando Elbe, a volunteer unit specifically trained for ramming attacks against bomber formations. The volunteers signed declarations acknowledging probable death. Hauptmann Heinrich Rosner, commanding Sonderkommando Elbe, briefed his pilots. "You are not expected to survive. You are expected to destroy your target." On April 7, 1945, 120 German fighters launched ramming attacks against 1,300 American bombers over central Germany. The Germans destroyed 23 bombers and damaged 176 more. Luftwaffe losses: 77 fighters and pilots. The Americans repaired damaged aircraft and continued operations. The Luftwaffe never recovered those pilots. Yet even ramming attacks couldn't alter the strategic equation. The 1st Bombardment Division's records from April 1945 documented operations continuing throughout Germany's collapse. On April 16, 1945, just 3 weeks before Germany's surrender, the 379th Bombardment Group at Kimballton dispatched 37 B-17s to bomb rail yards at Dresden. All returned safely. The mission was the group's 330th combat operation. German fighter opposition: 0 aircraft encountered. The Luftwaffe had ceased to exist as an effective force not because they stopped fighting, but because American production had simply overwhelmed their capacity to replace losses. Individual German fighter pilots understood this reality through brutal experience. Lieutenant Heinz Nock of JG-11 maintained a detailed diary throughout the war. His March 1944 entries documented the psychological toll. March 2nd. Shot down. B-17. My 20th victory. Watched 12 more continue to target. March 8th. Attacked formation of 300 bombers. Got 1. Lost 4 friends. March 15th. We are committing suicide daily. The Americans replace losses faster than we create them. Nock survived the war with 33 victories. His diary's final entry, dated April 25, 1945, read simply, "Germany has lost. The Americans proved it from 25,000 feet every day for 3 years." The Luftwaffe's internal assessment documents, captured at war's end and preserved in National Archives Record Group 242, revealed an organization that recognized defeat long before Germany surrendered. A January 1945 analysis from Luftwaffe operations staff calculated that maintaining air superiority against American bombers would require 3,500 fighters operational daily with pilot replacement. Rates of 400 per month. Actual German capacity: 1,200 fighters operational with pilot replacement rates of 150 per month. The analysis concluded, air superiority over Reich territory is mathematically impossible against current American bomber offensive capacity. The human cost of proving American bomber doctrine viable exceeded anything strategic planners had imagined. The 100th Bombardment Group, the Bloody Hundredth, exemplified this terrible calculus. Between June 1943 and April 1945, the group flew 306 combat missions and lost 177 B-17s in combat, a staggering 58% loss rate that would have ended any pre-war air campaign. Yet operations never ceased. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Rosie Rosenthal, who flew 52 combat missions with the 100th, wrote in his post-war memoir, We knew the statistics. 1 in 4 crews completed 25 missions. We flew anyway. Not from courage alone, but because the factories kept building bombers faster than Germany could shoot them down. The strategic validation came not from tactical success rates, but from sustained operations despite catastrophic losses. Between August 1942 and May 1945, the 8th Air Force lost 4,735 B-17s in combat. That's 182 bombers per month on average. Losses that would have terminated British, German, or Japanese bomber operations within weeks. American production replaced these losses while simultaneously expanding total force strength. In January 1943, the 8th Air Force could dispatch 91 B-17s on its largest mission. By January 1945, single missions involved 1,000-plus B-17s. The Luftwaffe shot down thousands of bombers while facing formations that grew larger every month. This wasn't victory despite losses, it was victory through absorbing losses no other nation could sustain. By January 1944, the strategic equation had shifted irrevocably. The 8th Air Force could dispatch 700 B-17s on a single mission. The 15th Air Force in Italy added another 300. German fighters faced not hundreds, but thousands of defensive machine guns. The P-51 Mustang escort fighters' arrival eliminated the Luftwaffe's advantage of attacking unescorted formations. The bombing statistics tell the story. In 1942, American heavy bombers dropped 1,561 tons on German targets. In 1943, 44,165 tons. In 1944, 389,119 tons. In 1945, 471,741 tons. The B-17 specifically accounted for 640,000 tons of the 1.5 million tons American heavy bombers dropped on European targets. That's 1.28 billion pounds of high explosives and incendiaries delivered by an aircraft the Luftwaffe expected to suppress within 6 months. The target analysis reveals the B-17's comprehensive impact. Industrial facilities, 224,000 tons. Transportation infrastructure, 186,000 tons. Oil refineries, 98,000 tons. Military installations, 76,000 tons. City areas, 56,000 tons. The tonnage exceeded the entire German Luftwaffe's bomb load dropped on Britain during the Blitz by a factor of 3. The operational tempo itself demonstrated American industrial superiority. The 8th Air Force flew 10,631 bomber missions between August 1942 and May 1945. The 15th Air Force in Italy added 3,395 missions. That's 14,026 distinct bombing operations over 33 months, an average of 425 missions per month, or 14 missions daily. Each mission required hundreds of bombers, thousands of crew, millions of gallons of fuel, and tens of thousands of bombs. The logistics alone would have overwhelmed German capacity. American forces sustained this operational rate while simultaneously conducting the Pacific Campaign, supplying the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease, and maintaining forces in Italy, North Africa, and later France. The maintenance requirements revealed another dimension of American industrial depth. Each B-17 required 100 hours of maintenance for every hour of combat flying time. A typical mission lasted 8 hours, requiring 800 hours of maintenance work. With 1,000 B-17s operational in England by mid-1944, the 8th Air Force needed 800,000 man-hours of maintenance work after each major mission. The Army Air Forces employed 156,000 maintenance personnel in England alone, more than the entire Luftwaffe fighter pilot corps. These mechanics had tools, spare parts, and replacement components in quantities German ground crews never imagined. An American crew chief could requisition a replacement engine and have it installed within 48 hours. German mechanics scavenged parts from destroyed aircraft to keep operational planes flying. The ammunition expenditure demonstrated American abundance versus German scarcity. Each B-17G carried 11,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition across its 13 machine gun positions. A 1,000 bomber mission carried 11 million rounds of defensive ammunition. The Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Missouri produced 3.5 million rounds of .50 caliber daily by 1944. American B-17s fired more defensive ammunition in a single week than the Luftwaffe fired offensively in a month. When German fighter pilots described encountering walls of tracers, they weren't exaggerating. American gunners could afford to fire continuously because resupply was infinite. German fighters never stopped trying to stop them. Luftwaffe fighter production reached 25,285 aircraft in 1944, the highest of the war. Yet every month, bomber formations grew larger, while fighter opposition grew more desperate. The Luftwaffe's own statistics documented the reversal. In September 1942, German fighters averaged 4.7 B-17s shot down per 100 sorties. By September 1943, 3.2 per 100 sorties. By September 1944, 0.8 per 100 sorties. The defensive armament, formation tactics, and escort fighters created a survival system German fighters couldn't overcome. Major Wilhelm Jahnen of NJG-6 Night Fighters wrote in his memoir after the war, "We thought the Americans were fools flying in daylight. Daylight meant visibility, which meant vulnerability. But daylight also meant accuracy. They destroyed our factories with precision we couldn't match. Night bombing is terror. Day bombing is industrial destruction. We learned too late which was more dangerous." The psychological impact matched the physical destruction. German civilians learned to dread clear skies. Bombers' weather meant American formations at 25,000 feet, contrails marking their approach, sirens wailing warnings that came too late. The formations flew with mechanical precision, dropped their bombs, and returned to England, day after day after day. No weather could stop them. No fighters could turn them back. The Reich's industry died under those defensive boxes of flying fortresses. General Adolf Galland's post-war interrogation, preserved at the National Archives in Record Group 242, captured the Luftwaffe's final assessment. "We calculated we could destroy the American bomber offensive before it became critical. We calculated wrong. Every assumption about attrition rates, replacement capacity, and operational sustainability proved false. The Americans lost bombers at rates we thought unsustainable. They kept coming. We shot down 4,735 B-17s during the war. They built 12,731. The mathematics were simple. We lost." The numbers Galland cited weren't just production statistics. They represented a fundamental difference in how democracies and dictatorships mobilize for total war. German aircraft production concentrated in large factories vulnerable to bombing. American production dispersed across thousands of facilities. German production relied on slave labor operating under threat. American production employed citizens working for wages. German production peaked in 1944, then collapsed. American production sustained and accelerated. The human cost of proving this theorem was staggering. Of the 350,000 American aircrew who served in 8th and 15th Air Forces during the European campaign, 26,000 died in combat. Another 28,000 became prisoners of war. The 100th Bombardment Group at Thorpe Abbotts earned the nickname Bloody Hundredth after losing 9 of 13 B-17s on a single mission to Bremen on October 8, 1943. Entire crews disappeared into German flak or fighter attacks. 10 men per bomber, multiplied by 4,735 lost aircraft, equals 47,350 airmen who died or were captured in B-17s alone. Each statistic represented a crew that trained together, flew together, and often died together. Yet the offensive never faltered. When the 381st Bombardment Group lost 8 B-17s over Schweinfurt on October 14, 1943, replacement aircraft arrived from the States within 2 weeks. Replacement crews completed training and joined combat squadrons within a month. The production pipeline, Lieutenant Colonel Curtis LeMay, implemented treated losses as logistics problems, not strategic setbacks. Boeing's Seattle plant could replace a week's combat losses in 3 days of production. This industrial buffer meant tactical losses never accumulated into strategic defeat. The B-17 proved American strategic bombing doctrine partially correct. Daylight precision bombing could target industrial capacity effectively. The doctrine's assumption about unescorted bombers penetrating defended airspace proved catastrophically wrong. American aircrew died by thousands proving it. But American industrial capacity and tactical adaptation turned a flawed doctrine into an effective strategy through sheer quantitative superiority. They built enough bombers to absorb unsustainable losses and continue operations. Albert Speer, Nazi armaments minister, wrote in his Spandau prison diary, "The American bombers destroyed not just our factories, but our belief in victory. We could rebuild bomb damage in weeks. We couldn't rebuild the psychological damage of watching formation after formation pass overhead while our fighters fell in flames. They demonstrated that Germany's industrial base was inadequate for total war against American production capacity. The disparity extended beyond aviation. By war's end, American factories had produced 88,410 tanks, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2.4 million trucks, and 324,750 aircraft of all types. Germany produced 46,857 tanks, 159,147 artillery pieces, 345,000 trucks, and 119,307 aircraft total. In every category, American production exceeded German by factors of 2 to 3. The B-17 campaign wasn't an isolated phenomenon, but a manifestation of comprehensive industrial superiority applied to strategic bombing. What happened in the skies over Germany reflected what was happening in factories across America. Democratic capitalism outproducing authoritarian socialism through systems the Nazis couldn't comprehend or replicate. German fighter pilots recognized this reality through hard experience. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-77, survived 993 combat missions and recorded 176 victories. His 1977 memoir acknowledged, "We calculated that shooting down 5% of each bomber raid would make the offensive unsustainable. We achieved this rate repeatedly. The Americans sustained it anyway. They accepted losses that would have ended any Luftwaffe campaign. This wasn't courage or determination, though they had both. This was industrial depth we couldn't match. For every bomber we destroyed, 2 more appeared. We were fighting arithmetic, not airmen." Modern strategic bombing descends directly from the B-17 campaign. The B-52 Stratofortress carries the Flying Fortresses concept forward. Heavily armed, high-altitude platforms delivering massive payloads with precision. The Gulf War's precision bombing relied on technology the B-17 pioneered. Systematic destruction of enemy industrial capacity while minimizing civilian casualties. The doctrine born in Seattle, validated over Germany, remains fundamental to American air power. The final irony belongs to Hauptmann Hans-Joachim Jabs, who watched those 12 B-17s over Rouen on August 17, 1942. He survived the war with 50 confirmed kills. In a 1983 interview, he reflected, "We thought 12 bombers were a curiosity. Within a year, we faced hundreds. Within 2 years, thousands. I shot down 7 B-17s personally. I watched hundreds more continue to their targets untouched. We won tactical victories while losing the strategic war. Those 12 bombers I saw in 1942 weren't the threat. They were a warning we failed to understand." The Luftwaffe expected 6 months. They got 3 years of escalating bombardment that helped destroy the Third Reich. The B-17 Flying Fortress, built by Boeing engineers trying to save their company during the Depression, manufactured by women and minorities, Nazi ideology deemed inferior, flying in formations German fighters couldn't break, dropped 640,000 tons of bombs that proved industrial democracy's superiority over martial dictatorship. The numbers tell the story. The numbers always told the story. The Luftwaffe just couldn't believe them until the Reich burned.